At 0317, our radios went dead 2 meters from the door. Not static, nothing. The carrier vanished as if someone flipped a switch inside the steel. We were 4 deep in a service corridor under a Mojave sensor site, tracking shortwave dropouts that had erased a grid of telemetry overnight. The blast door at the end wasn't on any blueprint we'd been issued. It was double-leaf, dog-latched with a horizontal bar and 2 clamps. Tool marks cut through old grime. The bolt heads on the left clamp were clean, unoxidized. Someone had worked on it recently. I raised my compass. The needle swung hard toward the seam, then trembled as if it wanted through the metal. Behind us, the emergency lights dipped and recovered. I keyed my handset again. No tone, no side tone. Just my breathing in the mask and 4 soldiers staring at a door that officially did not exist. This channel documents frontline accounts like this one. Subscribe for future reports. We had rolled out before midnight from our forward staging point. A routine response package for communications anomalies, 4-man Recon element, basic diagnostic gear, 1 handheld spectrum analyzer, and hard copies of the facility schematics stamped with the current revision number. The site was supposed to be boring, an unmarked cluster of low buildings and buried conduit feeding remote sensors across the Mojave. The duty tech reported intermittent shortwave loss, then a full blackout on 2 channels used for perimeter telemetry. No intrusion alarms, no power faults, just silence where the sensors should have been talking. We entered through a maintenance access and followed the service tunnel map exactly. Conduit runs matched. Junction boxes matched. But the deeper we went, the less our radios liked it. Brief drops, thin audio, then full carrier loss in the same stretch of corridor. The blueprint ended at a blank wall. The corridor did not. It kept going, straight into that door. We stopped short of the line where the radios died and worked the problem like we'd been trained. Verify, isolate, record. Soldier C kept the flashlight low and marked our backtrack with tape. Soldier B knelt with the spectrum analyzer. Soldier D watched the corridor behind us. At exactly 2 meters from the blast door, every handset dropped carrier. Not a fade. 1 step forward. Audio thin. 1 more. Nothing. I tested it twice, forward and back. The boundary never moved. We swapped to spare radios, changed batteries, changed antennas, and tried a different band. Same result. Step back beyond 2 meters and the carrier returned at full strength with a pop. The compass agreed. At 3 meters it held north. At 2, the needle snapped toward the seam between the door leaves and trembled, then settled, pointing straight into the steel. Soldier A checked with his own compass and got the same pull. Something behind that door was strong enough to override the Earth's field. The blueprint in my pocket showed a dead end. The corridor did not. On paper, this place ended 20 feet behind us. In front of us stood a double-leaf blast door set into a thick bulkhead frame with a recessed lip like it was meant to seal. No signs, no big markings, nothing to explain why it was there. The locking hardware was simple and brutal. 1 massive horizontal crossbar seated into heavy brackets, cinched down by 2 rotary clamps. No padlocks, no dangling parts. Up close, the door looked edited, not new, old steel under dust with fresh handling in 1 place. The right clamp had scoring and a faint ridge of corrosion. The left clamp looked recently worked. Bolt heads sharp, edges clean, and a slightly different shade of matte paint around the bracket plate. Tool marks cut through the grime, crescent-shaped, like a wrench had slipped and been corrected. We documented what we could without crossing the line. I took photos from outside the dead zone. The images came out slightly smeared around the clamps like motion blur, even though my hands were steady. Soldier B measured the boundary with a tape. 2 meters, give or take an inch, consistent across 3 tests. Soldier C checked the wall panels and conduit for a new feed line or a hidden junction. Nothing fresh, nothing recently opened. On the floor, dust lay uniform except for a thin scuff leading toward the left clamp, as if a heavy tool case had been dragged into position. Soldier B swept from outside the dead zone. The analyzer showed a broad spike near our shortwave frequency like a blanket of interference. It pulsed, on, off, on, at a steady interval. When I stepped forward inside the 2-meter boundary, the display stuttered and went blank, as if the receiver had been overwhelmed. When I stepped back, the pulse returned immediately, still perfectly timed. I tried the site duty tech. Nothing at 2 meters. 3 steps back and he came in clear. I reported an unmapped blast door and a fixed radius comms drop. There was a pause. Then, stand by. 10 seconds of silence, then a different voice asked for our corridor designation and confirmed, flatly, that it didn't exist in his inventory. His next instruction was immediate. Do not touch the hardware. Do not attempt entry. We took one more check. I held my glove near the seam and felt a faint, cold airflow. Not enough to be ventilation, enough to suggest pressure on the other side. Soldier C's beam skimmed the crossbar and clamps, throwing back dull, matte highlights. In the quiet, the only constant sound was the faint pulse from the analyzer's speaker, steady, patient, unmoved by our presence. I called our watch officer and gave him facts only. Unmapped door at a mapped dead end, comms loss at a fixed radius, compass deflection, pulsing interference, evidence of recent clamp replacement. He told us to hold position and wait for guidance. While we waited, the corridor lights dipped and recovered, and the interference pulse stayed perfectly steady, like something behind the door was counting time. None of us spoke above a whisper after that. My watch ticked, but the corridor felt outside time. We held at the edge of the dead zone and waited for the next order. The corridor was quiet enough to hear nylon creak when someone shifted their weight. Soldier C kept her light off the door and on our hands and gear, like we were trying not to wake anything up. At EO 329, the pulse on Soldier B's analyzer changed. Same interval, but the amplitude rose in a smooth ramp, like someone was increasing power in measured steps. I watched the clamps. Nothing moved. I watched the compass. The needle stopped trembling and locked hard into the seam, steady as a pinned compass on a map. Then, our radios did something worse than dying. From just outside the 2-meter line, I keyed my handset to report the change. Instead of side tone, I heard my own transmission come back a half-second late, thin, flattened, but unmistakably my voice. Soldier D snapped his head toward me, eyes wide behind the lenses. I keyed again, shorter. The echo repeated. Same delay, same compressed cadence, like the corridor itself was replaying what I'd said. Soldier B held up the analyzer. The pulse stopped the instant I pressed the PTT. The moment I released it, the pulse resumed. Stronger than before. It wasn't random interference anymore. It was timing itself against us. A sharp metallic click came from the door hardware. Not a groan. Not settling steel. A precise mechanical click. Soldier C brought her flashlight beam up in a tight cone and froze it on the left clamp. The clamp didn't open, but the bracket plate had shifted, barely a few millimeters, enough to expose a clean crescent of metal underneath, brighter in grayscale than the surrounding grime, fresh. Like the hardware had been seated recently and was now finding its final position. Another click. The crossbar flexed against the brackets, just enough to cast a different shadow line. Soldier A raised a gloved hand, stopped himself short of the dead zone, and held it there as if he could feel vibration through the air. The 2-meter boundary didn't move, but the sensation in the corridor changed. Pressure tightening, the way a room feels before a generator kicks on. I reported exactly what we observed. Pulse responding to PTT, delayed voice echo, hardware microshift on the left clamp. The watch officer didn't ask questions. He said, "Back out. Now. No further testing." We stepped away from the line together. As we crossed 3 meters, the radios snapped back to normal, clean carrier. Behind us, the pulse on the analyzer dropped to baseline. The door stayed shut. The clamps stayed seated. But the clean crescent of exposed metal remained. Proof that something had adjusted itself without a human hand on it. We backed out the way we came, slow and tight, keeping our spacing and our lights low. The corridor felt longer on the return, not in distance, in attention, like every step was being measured. As soon as we were beyond the dead zone, the duty tech's voice came in clear and too casual, asking if we'd found anything obvious. I told him we were pulling out under instruction and that a follow-on team would coordinate. He didn't argue. He didn't ask who gave the order. At the surface, a vehicle we hadn't arrived with was waiting in the gravel. No unit markings, lights off, engine running. 2 men met us at the access hatch with hard cases and clipboards. They didn't introduce themselves. They asked for our printed schematics first, not our statements. Soldier D handed over the folder. One of them flipped through, stopped at the page where the tunnel should have ended, and tapped the blank space with a pen as if confirming a known error. They took our radios next. Not for inspection, confiscation. Every handset, every spare battery, the analyzer, my compass. When Soldier B asked for a receipt, the man said, "You'll get updated equipment in the morning," and didn't write anything down. We were driven back to staging without conversation. Before dawn, we sat in a small room with a single overhead light and gave separate accounts. No one accused us of exaggeration. No one tried to disprove what we'd seen. The questions were narrow. Distance from the door when carrier dropped, exact interval of the pulse, the number of times the clamp clicked, whether the echo had repeated our words or altered them. They were building a technical record, not a story. By noon, our mission log in the system showed only communications interference, maintenance corridor inspection, no irregularities. The site schematic revision number had changed. The page that had been blank was now a solid block labeled as structural bulkhead. The tunnel ended where it was supposed to. On paper, the door had never been there. 3 weeks later, I asked for the replacement radios. Supply issued new handsets without serial history and told me, off record, to stop requesting the old ones. I pulled the latest facility map from the shared drive. The service corridor ended at a concrete wall. No bulkhead frame, no clamps, no door. The telemetry dropouts in the Mojave were logged as weather-related attenuation and closed. I kept one detail I hadn't surrendered, the tape measure photo showing the 2-meter line. The image is still on my personal drive. Every time I open it, the timestamp reads 0317.